Hello and welcome to Straight Talk, Supply Chain Insights, the podcast for your supply chain leader who is on the go and wants to be in the know. And now, your host, Lora Cecere.
So Lora, thank you very much for taking the time to talk with me. I'm very pleased to be here. Just a brief introduction of myself. My name is Dan Pellathy. I teach management, operations management, and supply chain management at Grand Valley State University in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And I also teach a supply chain planning course for the University of Tennessee during the summer sessions. I'm very excited to hear what you have to say about supply chain planning and hoping to share this with our students in that supply chain planning class so that they get a sense of both of what the basics are in terms of where the core competencies are that students need and companies need excellence for supply chain planning, and then what are some of the new and emerging approaches that companies are taking in the current highly uncertain, highly dynamic environment that companies are trying to navigate today.
Well, thanks, Daniel. I'm excited to be here, and we're going to share these results for planners everywhere on YouTube. And so not only are we going to give some insight for your class, but hopefully people around the world that are in academic institutions can also, gain insights from your questions. Now, just to start, I was a University of Tennessee grad. So for all those volunteers out there, my heart is with you. So how can I help you today, Daniel? What's top of mind?
For at least our students, one thing that they're very interested in is just kind of your own career trajectory. So if you could just introduce a little bit about yourself, your own career trajectory, how you got started in supply chain, and what keeps you interested in the field.
So my name is Lora Cecere. I'm the founder of Supply Chain Insights, and I've been in supply chain management since I graduated from the University of Tennessee in 1977. And I graduated as a chemical engineering major. Really loved process theory. Took it twice because I liked it so much. So I'm a weird kind of gal. I love the world of manufacturing. So I started in manufacturing leadership. I worked for Procter & Gamble in high performance team management. Nothing's more exciting to me than opening the door of a factory and hearing machines and just the people element of a factory, right? It's like its own community and kind of the success of making lines and processes come together. I'm a big fan of manufacturing processes. And because of my interest in manufacturing, I spent some time in new product launch, packaging innovation, product innovation, and I feel very fortunate to have both a manufacturing and an R&D background. And then I went through progressive roles where I changed companies from Procter & Gamble to a company called General Foods that was purchased by Kraft. And at General Foods, I launched new products. So products like stovetop stuffing that's still on the market and Jello Pops and Pudding Pops. I worked with marketing teams to come up with, asset investments and design of those processes and rolled them out nationwide. And it was really great to, feel like I made a difference in some of those products and rollout. And then I went to Clorox and managed distribution for the Southeast Clorox and Bleach, 409, Tilex, Clorox 2, all of those products back before they bought Burt Bees. And I managed a warehouse out of Atlanta and was very early in the days of vendor managed inventory with Walmart. And this was the 1980s, and I thought that outside-in data would transform demand management. I was so excited about building networks. And little did I know that VMI and outside-in processes would have, a hype cycle and then quickly fall because we weren't aligned to use that data. And in those days, I put in some early warehouse management technologies because back in those days, we didn't have a perpetual inventory signal. And I got very excited about technology and technology promise. And I was always that business leader that wanted things to do more. So I got put on a lot of teams to implement technology. And so when I went from Clorox to Dreyer's Grand Ice Cream, I implemented warehouse management and I built a planning system on an Excel spreadsheet for factory scheduling for ice cream because we had a long tail. And I got very interested in the intersection of technology and supply chain. And this is back before supply chain was even a household term. Supply chain was defined in 1982 Supply chain planning in the 1980s was still, very much around old architectures and desktop systems. And we were arguing about 32-bit versus 64-bit and movement to client server. And I moved from there to a company called Manugistics and went from a manufacturing world to building software. And I got to tell you, that was quite a transition. I was not that good at building software. I had to really tax my brain to be very detailed in product requirements, which has been great for me to have had the manufacturing, the product development, the distribution, and the technology building elements of my career. So after I worked for a company named Manugistics for about 10 years, I went to Gartner Group. And I believe that Gartner would be a great place for me to go as an analyst to help business leaders to select technology and to build teams. But Gartner didn't care as much about supply chain as I did. Gartner was a very, very large company. And I was like, supply chain kind of gets lost. And I really want to write for business leaders. And I spent all day talking to CIOs that were often laggard companies about technology. And that just wasn't my bailiwick. I wanted to talk to innovators around analytics and planning systems. And I wanted to have more freedom to write for business leaders. So I went to a company called AMR Research in the period of 2014 to 2021 and led the research teams for a company called AMR Research. And AMR got bought by Gartner, so I couldn't go forward, so I had to start my own company. So I write around innovation and planning, innovation and supply chain excellence. We do an annual conference. I host and speak at a lot of conferences. I'm followed by 326,000 people on LinkedIn, which is very humbling. When I write an article, I think it hits desks all around the world and people will send me emails and I answer every email. But what keeps me going is I think supply chain is so essential for economies, for communities, and for the planet. And one of the things, I could retire, I'm 68, but one of the things that keeps me going is we are not taking care of the planet. I'm an environmentalist. 70% of the impact of the planet lays outside the four walls of the enterprise. And we're only really investing in enterprise technology. So that's a little bit about Lora. That's how I got started, and that's what keeps me going.
That's fabulous. Thank you so much. I mean, just to see that, a career in supply chain and, it covers such a broad area of supply chain that you can go from process development to manufacturing to distribution, product development, technology, and then out into the kind of broader community and economic topics that you're just touching on. I mean, it really is a field that anyone can fit into and find an interest and a passion in. And so I think that's an important thing for students who are getting started in the field, because they oftentimes don't have a clear sense of, where they might fit, or they have kind of preconceived notions of supply chain is a very analytical field. It's not really my thing. Or I have various kinds of interests that are broader than simply, the kind of business work that I do, and that. So how does supply chain fit in there? So I think that's a great introduction and just a great story for students to see. So getting into a little bit of the content for this course, of course, a supply chain planning class. And my first question to you is, how would you define supply chain planning? Or if you put it slightly differently, what do you envision that supply chain planning processes entail? What would be the kind of meat and potatoes of supply chain planning that you would say you have to be doing this?
So let's take your first question of how do I define supply chain planning? It is the ability to make better decisions using technology. And we have focused on engines, or the use of math and technology constructs, to basically take inputs and drive outputs, and hopefully they make better decisions. However, many companies have kind of stubbed their toes because they've focused on putting in technology, but not really asking themselves, am I getting a better decision? Or how do I use this answer to redefine work? And so I would encourage all of your students to ask the question of, am I getting a better output? And how do I tie the output from the engine to rules and policy and strategy? Because one of the struggles, Daniel, is that only 9% of companies actively design their supply chains. And I'm talking about designing flows, things like inventory strategies, form and function of inventory, push-pull decoupling points, postponement strategy, management of complexity. And students that are really going to achieve greatness in this decision support are going to really excel in those kind of capabilities of using visualization tools to help people understand that the supply chain is a complex nonlinear system. And if we don't design and we don't manage complexity, we constantly throw the supply chain out of balance.
So that's a great question. Maybe I'm going to ask a follow-up here, which is it's both a complex system and also it is a human technology interaction system. And so managing that human technology interaction so that humans are users of that technology, but aren't used by the technology. Would you say that that's a kind of a way of thinking about this topic?
Well, I think that as we have advancements in the capabilities of technology, it's incumbent upon us to redesign work. And that's one of the things that I think we have failed in over the last 2 decades. The technology capabilities have improved, but I never thought we would have planning groups of 400 to 600 people, right? You know, unfortunately, planning groups have sort of become like the typing pools of the 1980s, right? The goal of decision support is to help business leaders, and planners really need to be able to work on influence management and the use of the data to make better decisions. Many business leaders don't understand the interactions of supply chains. So the more that people that are using the technology can help business leaders to visualize the complexities and the nonlinearity of supply chains, the better they will achieve greatness in this area.
That's terrific. So that touches then on the kind of core capabilities that you think supply chain planners need to have, that ability to visualize data and to make the case to business leaders in terms of providing clarity or visibility into supply chain processes. Is there anything else that you think supply chain planners need to have as part of their kind of core capabilities when they go into an organization?
I think humility and the ability to listen. I think that many planners make the mistake of looking at data and trying to drive their opinions versus presenting the data and helping people to understand options and listening for what's important to the organization and making decisions. This process of decision making, I don't think we've spent enough time on the human element of what is the role of the global team, what is the role of the regional team, what is the role of the divisional team, what is the role of the business team. And as a result, organizations in the rollout of planning are just really structurally encased with a lot of politics. And unfortunately, getting through those politics will become a challenge for planners because many times people will game the system for bonus incentives. So the more you can help to be data-driven, but human and sensitive and listen and understand, the better. Where you're going to lose is when you try to fight a battle and lose the war, right? So this whole role of influence management, of helping people to visualize, listening for understanding, and bringing that into data-driven discussions, the more you're a conduit for that kind of learning and visualization and education, the more people are going to come to depend upon you. And get good at your job. Get good at the river of demand and understanding demand profiles. Just don't focus on imprecise data to be focused on error. Understand coefficient of variation and forecast value add and look at, am I getting a good plan? And are we using the plan in terms of schedule adherence and, first pass yield, and hold yourself accountable for driving value.
Yeah, that's great. And so, I had set up the question by saying making the case, but maybe that's not it, right? They don't make the case. Rather, they provide the support so that other decision makers can really make the decisions in a well-informed, kind of clear-eyed way.
That's right. And there is probably not a better training job than planning to understand the complexities of the business, the trade-offs of the business, and the personalities in the business. And so use it as a great opportunity to learn.
Great. So we are currently operating in an environment that's just extraordinarily dynamic and uncertain. Are there kinds of approaches that you see out there, emerging approaches in the field that you think are particularly useful for companies in terms of how to manage some of the complexity or some of the dynamics in the current environment?
Absolutely. So I think what's happening in the digital twin, the ability to model a plan that is not connected to the business, but is on a desktop, and the visualization of the modeling, the collaborative platforms that allow distributed models so that business leaders can do what if analysis and share their models, I think are really fascinating. I think the building of rules-based ontologies so organizations can sense, learn, and act, and we can have multiple ifs to multiple thens. The old-fashioned engines only allowed single ifs to single thens. So, for example, it was order or shipments into demand plan to give me an output. And today's engines are using 30 to 40 inputs, market drivers, unstructured text on rating and reviews and consumer products, weather data, and these 30 plus factors will change in relative importance, but they are able to give better input, and the output is no longer a number. It is more of a stochastic output for what if, more like weather forecasting. So we have what if for demand, and we can think about demand as a flow, not as an engine. And that excites me, as the redefinition of demand management and the building of demand visibility for collaborative planning. The second thing that really excites me is the building of network models to allow us to be able to decrease the bullwhip effect, the amplification and the distortion of the signal, and to be able to align manufacturing and procurement with our buy plans. Today, companies don't have a good buy plan. And we also don't have the ability to effectively drive what I call bidirectional orchestration. And bidirectional orchestration through the design of the supply chain allows me to set up the levers I can pull across source, make, and deliver to deal with variability. The supply chain was set up on three factors that are no longer valid: that governments would be rational, variability would be low, and that logistics would always be available. Not true, right? And we found that out in spades. So to do bidirectional orchestration, I have to design for alternate supply. I have to design for alternate bill of material. I have to design for alternate inventory strategies. And I have to inform that based upon planning master data to look at how lead times are changing, how currency is changing. And so that whole change of planning in this supply network effect for bidirectional orchestration and network orchestration excites me. So I don't know if that helps you, Daniel.
That's terrific. So, I mean, there are two things there that I heard that I find to be really fascinating topics that I've done some work on. One is this idea of demand not as an engine, but as a flow. So
yes.
Can you just elaborate on that point just a little bit?
Well, let me tell you a story. So, Daniel, I teach business classes. Sometimes in business, people ask me to come and teach, their team's supply chain management. And one of the first exercises they have people do is to draw a supply chain. So they come in and they're sitting and they're looking at white paper and they've got crayons and they hate me for it, right? But of 150 students, only one person in a business capacity has ever put a customer on a supply chain map. That's horrible, right? Our supply chain should start with the customer, and our demand starts from the customer back. And we have to think about demand as a flow. And most companies have 5 to 7 supply chains based upon the rhythms and cycles of those flows. So to understand the flow, you've got to look at the coefficient of variation and the lumpiness of the flow and think about demand as a flow. The second exercise I have people do is to draw the river demand. So I'll often bring people together from different groups, so digital marketing, sales, price management, finance, across the organization. And you'll find that people have 7 to 8 different technologies that are dealing with some element of demand, but they don't have a baseline demand. And when I talk about baseline demand, I'm talking about market potential. I'm looking at understanding the elasticity of demand shaping versus shifting programs, and starting with the market and translating the market signals with minimal latency into a flow. when people draw their river of demand, they get a better understanding of this as a flow. They look at how they're affecting the flow and their lack of good information about baseline and their lack of understanding of shaping versus shifting and their lack of ability to decrease what I call demand latency. So demand latency is the time from consumption to an order. And just to give you some perspective, when I worked for Clorox and I sold blue label gallon bleach, the demand latency was 18 days from the purchase at Walmart out of the Lawrence, DC to my factory in Atlanta, Georgia, 18 days. So every time I got an order, that was an 18-day offset. But then marketing got excited about, we were going to add fragrance to the bleach and we were going to add sizes to the bleach. As we got pints and quarts, so we got different colors, yellow, green, pink. The demand latency for many of those products increased from 18 days to 65 days. So the order latency for a quart of a flowered bleach was, out in 60 days. And so people don't understand demand latency and that offset lead time and the translation of that market data into the flows and how to minimize those flows and the bullwhip effect in the organization. And that's actually something that I'm trying to help technologists understand because our technology is very supply centric. And when we talk about resilience and we talk about risk management, we're talking about very supply-centric terms, and this whole area of demand is very unautomated right now, and it's my passion, and I hope to change it by the time I retire.
Ha! You're not ambitious at all. So I think that's great. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with the approach of designing for, supply chain with demand flows at the kind of core of what you're trying to do and managing those demand flows. It's just absolutely critical. The second thing, going back to, something you had mentioned before, the second thing that you had mentioned was designing supply chains, designing flexibility into supply chains. Correct. So that you are designing supply chains with flexibility, with what I might call agility in mind. Maybe just elaborate a little bit on that if you care to.
Where we have focused on supply chain excellence is sending us in the wrong direction for this unprecedented time. Because many people have defined supply chain excellence as an efficient supply chain, which is really a coin-operated buzzword for the lowest cost. And so what we've tried to do is look at supply chain as one supply chain and make it very efficient, low cost. And we've tried to make the silos within the supply chain, sourcing, manufacturing, delivery, sales, and marketing, very efficient, and the functional metrics really make them very efficient, but it has driven us out of alignment to make better decisions together, and it also has increased costs and not allowed us to achieve economies of scale in supply chain. So I believe companies need to focus on balanced scorecards, and I did some work with a university, Arizona State, where I took a combination of 150 metrics and I said, which metrics in combination would give me the highest value? And at that point in time, it was 2012, it was growth, return on invested capital, inventory, and operating margin. And, we could disagree with those metrics, but it's a balanced scorecard, and I would add customer service, but we don't have a public available database for customer service. So those metrics, when I align to margin versus cost, I'm able to keep those functions in balance, right? And the design of these flows really needs to come about with a focus on the balanced scorecard, not on functional metrics, and aligning on what kind of things could we do in the organization to improve value. So, for example, demand shaping programs can improve value. I give blood for the Red Cross. I'm O positive. I had antibodies. And so the Red Cross actually used social programs to drive the right people to their collection centers. And, one of the things we don't think about is digital marketing connection with supply chain. I do a lot of work with L'Oreal in terms of early product launch, rating and reviews, and alignment of that supply chain to digital marketing. That is a demand shaping lever. We have postponement, we have alternate supply, we have alternate sourcing, we have, what we're doing in transportation. All of those are levers that we can pull if we have the right design to pull them, and alignment that we understand what's happening in the market and we need to pull them, and the ability to see and align to a balanced scorecard.
That's terrific. I think that, again, that ability to manage across not just an organization, but across a supply chain, so that we can have the flexibility to then kind of react to and manage those flows of demand when they occur. That's great. So, Lora, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate your conversation. My final question to you, and where can students go to get some additional resources? Where would you direct students to get some additional resources? And then I'll put you slightly on the spot. Can they reach out to you?
Oh, absolutely. I answer everybody on LinkedIn. So follow me on LinkedIn. If you send me an email, I'll answer it, and this conversation is a product of that. So every time I get a LinkedIn message, I answer it. So reach out. I write a blog called The Supply Chain Shaman. I write ebooks every year based upon my research. I do research using my LinkedIn following of 328,000 people to do primary research. So I think I'm a source. I think that the work that I'm doing on Project Zebra, where we're looking at outside-in processes, people drawing the river demand, animating the river demand, would be a great, resource for students. We are working with some academics and ASCM around how do we make this institutional in the SCORE model. So we have an outside-in model that people can look at using the SCORE methodology that is on the zebra.org website. We want to build a guiding coalition to change technology from very supply-centric to outside-in and more demand-centric, focused on flows and bidirectional orchestration and network orchestration. So that's a resource. And then I would encourage people to follow other people's writing in the industry. Adrian Gonzalez does some great work on logistics. I read Adrian all the time. I would encourage people to not read the technologist stuff because they tend to be pretty self-promoting, but be open-minded, be curious. And I guess I want to close with one piece of advice. When Lora Cecere graduated from the University of Tennessee in chemical engineering, I thought I'd be a plant manager. My goal was to be a plant manager. And if I had only focused on what I thought I wanted, I wouldn't be where I am today. Be open to the outcome. Every door that opens, embrace it. Be good at your current job, but you will probably go through 12 different positions, and jobs will appear that you can't even imagine if you're open to them. So I laugh because a lot of times I will talk to Gen Y and millennials who'll say, I need a fixed career path. And my caution is, don't limit your outcomes by trying to fix your career potential. So hopefully people will contact me. I'm passionate about the space, and it's great to talk to you today.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate your time. It was very nice talking with you.